Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about why insurance matters for game devs. Now, the game industry is full of risks. IP disputes, cyber attacks, contract issues, even failed crowdfunding campaigns. And while we never anticipate these things happening to us, sometimes they surface when we least expect it, inviting all sorts of chaos. So today, we explore how devs can avoid the hassle of the unknown by understanding how insurance can help developers avoid disaster, stay protected, and keep projects moving no matter the studio size. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Phil Wildman. Phil, how is it going? And thanks for being here on the show today.
Hey, good to meet you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, things are going well. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, folks, for those of you who don't know Phil, he is the founder of GG Insurance Services. And I mean, wait a minute. Everybody's like, wait, insurance? Like, don't worry. But I mean, but yes, he's the founder of that company and has been, the associate director general of that and General and Medical International. Those are some other companies that he's done. But what I want to do is actually just hand it over to Phil because yes, it's an insurance company. Yes, he's been doing insurance for lots of different things in years. But Phil, I really want to know what was this journey like getting from doing insurance, still doing insurance, but getting into games? Because I think this is very interesting. And I'm sure a lot of people today are like, yeah, that is. So let's hear it. What was that journey like and why are you in games now because of it?
So, well, first, I just want to do a big shout out to everybody that's still listening after the word insurance was mentioned. appreciate you sticking with me. But yeah, no, seriously, I've been doing insurance for like over 20 years now in London, doing all kinds of stuff like commercial business. I've been doing that for a long time, but I've always been really passionate about video games ever since I was a kid. I remember playing Monkey Island 2 and it like blowing my mind. And this was so cool. And there's just been like throughout my life, so many video games that I've played that I'm like, this is just, I love it. And it's been a big part of my life. And I had this kind of, I set up an insurance broker, a number of years ago, and I decided that we really needed to find a niche. We were doing a lot of general business and we were just getting all the stuff that nobody else wanted to do. And I was like, if you're going to be a broker, you need to like specialize in something, whether that's a type of insurance or an industry. So I was like, well, what could we do that's interesting? What do we do that could be fun? And it was like the light bulb moment where I was like, well, I like video games. Who's insuring all of these companies? Because there's, my library was just ridiculously huge. I was just sitting there scrolling through it, thinking like, well, there's lots of companies out there that make these games, and how does that work? And how are games made? Because there's a big difference, right, between being passionate about video games and understanding the industry. And I was very much the former. So the first step really was like trying to understand, well, how would insurance even work for a games company? That's usually the first question that people ask me. It's like, oh, insurance for video games, what does that even mean? And I had to ask myself that question and try and solve it. And, we've been doing this now for nearly 8 years, and we've grown from having like one or two studios, which I was like so excited about, the first game studio that actually trusted us to insure them. And now we've got, literally hundreds of developers and publishers all around the world that work with us. And it's been a great, really, really fun journey. So yeah, that's how we all got started.
I absolutely love that because, honestly, one of the reasons why I love it so much is even, pre-interview here as of now, like we were kind of sharing each other's stories and that was like mine too. It's like, oh, I want to get in marketing and
Right.
There's only so much you could do and differentiate yourself. And oh, great, you're helping cabinet makers or these other companies, right? And then next thing you're like, but I love games. Yeah. So that's a thing that really stood out to me. And I think we share too that there's lots of people that I've talked to on this podcast and elsewhere that have had similar stories and stuff. And it's just so exciting. And I think what's really cool, which we're totally going to get into, folks, is, well, first, I mean, I didn't say it at all, and you know that I would have if it was the case, but this is not a sponsored episode, right? So, but I just say that too because the focus here and everything else is looking at like insurance in a completely different way. And it's no different than when sometimes we come across things with, oh, well, marketing, that might be sleazy because it's, I have to be like salesy and all this other stuff. And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be. I think a lot of you from listening know that and everything. There's others out there like Chris Kukowski that says, hey, you don't have to be sleazy like that and everything else, right? It's the same thing with insurance. And, Phil today is going to kind of explain that. And there's some really cool stories that we're going to share too in a moment. But first, before we do, Phil, you provided some really cool insights and stuff, but we want to get to know you a little bit more. So to do that, we're going to have you go through the Q box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's just a series of quick random questions we prepared for Phil today. So Phil, are you ready for the Q box round?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. So first and foremost, what's your main approach to tackling problems?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the kind of problem, but I would say personally, I just like to give the problem space to breathe. Like it's so tempting to just shoot from the hip and be like, what's the quickest way I can solve this? But I've learned, like, as I've got older, just, think about it, give it time, and don't panic about it. There's always something worse that could happen, right? So, we were talking about this actually only yesterday. Something came up, and it just needed space. I think the problem just needed space to breathe. So, yeah, that's how I do it.
Awesome, great advice. All right, next is, well, what's the most helpful or impactful advice you ever received?
So my first ever job, my boss was like my mentor, and he said to me that everything that you're doing, I know this was kind of in an insurance context, but generally in life, like don't ever feel pressured to bullshit. And that really stuck with me because whenever you're under pressure because you want to do a deal or you're trying to make a sale or whatever you're doing in your career, and there's always that like I just want to make the deal done. And if a customer asks me something or a client is querying something that we've said, you might be tempted to just be like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. It's all good. It's all good. When actually the best thing you can say is I don't know. And it's always okay to say I don't know. If you try and bullshit your way through something that you're not sure about, he explained to me, like, picture yourself in a US court with that email that you wrote in like 1,000 size font on a wall behind you, and someone's pointing at it and being like, what exactly did you mean by that? Because he said that happened to him. He was doing some insurance deal, and he was young, and he like tried to bullshit and said, oh, this is, don't worry, that's covered, it's fine. But it wasn't. And he just wanted to close a sale. And he said, yeah, it's always okay to say you don't know something, but it's never okay to bullshit. So that really stuck with me, and I've always tried to stick to that principle. And whenever we are onboarding new staff or I'm training people, I always say to them, never be pressured to make a mistake. Just, it's okay. Take your time. Never bullshit. Never lie. It's okay to admit you don't know something.
Yeah. And that's a valuable one too, because sometimes I feel like we're in this like age and even culture where we always feel like you have to know, like, and you need to give an answer and stuff. And I mean, I've been in that situation before too, but I've always found that, like, hey, just speak the truth. If you don't know, or in different contexts, you could be like, hey, look, I don't know, but I'm sure I can find out, whatever. Just at least, show like, right. Just be truthful about it, because otherwise, you're right, problems can happen, and we like to avoid problems when possible. So, all right, yeah. Good one there. And next, the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
So I have kids, so I don't have too much time to play these days. I feel like this is the great irony of my job now, is like, despite my like massive passion for games, I now never have any time to play them. But I'm trying to squeeze a little bit of time into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The original game was one of my like top games of all time, so I'm really enjoying what they've done with that. Monster Hunter Wilds, obviously that's awesome. Shout out to all the insect glaives out there, best class. I've also recently like got a new phone, so I've been like experimenting with mobile games for the first
Nice.
time. I've never had like such an up-to-date phone, and so I've been playing Wuthering Waves, which is really weird, really complicated, but the lore on that, I just don't understand it, but the gameplay is really good. And Moko, the new Supercell game, that's pretty cool. So enjoying that. And a little bit of Tiny Tina Wonderlands as well. Like recently, I just got a Borderlands itch that I wanted to scratch, and I like a bit of D&D. So I'm really enjoying that. But yeah, I never get as much time these days. Like those marathon sessions of like a whole weekend playing Civ, that is like a distant memory now. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I get what I can get.
Awesome. Well, hey, it sounds like in what little time you have, you're making some awesome time for those games. So great to hear. Well, Phil, thanks for sharing that. And now let's get into our topic for today, which I shared in the intro, which is, why insurance matters for game devs. And, like I said a little bit earlier too, we're really looking at this from different perspectives. I mean, heck, that's what we're here all about on the show anyway. So to kick things off, Phil, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about insurance in the game industry? Because I'm sure there's lots of them.
Yeah. I'd say, I mean, I'm biased, but I think the biggest misconception is that it's boring. It's actually super interesting because what you're looking at is what could go wrong with my company? What could go wrong with my business? What are all the risks? And I feel like because people kind of like don't really feel like they understand the insurance there's a bit of avoidance there. They're like, well, I don't really understand it. So I'm worried that if I buy something and I've not got the right thing and I try and make a claim, I'm not going to be covered. But if you kind of engage with the process, it can be really interesting. You can learn a lot about your business. So I'd say one of the biggest misconceptions is that it's a boring and difficult process. It can actually be really, really valuable to even if you like don't buy a policy, just like go through the process of like pulling up the drains on your business and figuring out like, well, I never knew that I was exposed to this. So I didn't even think of that being a problem. And the other big misconception is that like, it's only for the big studios. I'm a small indie developer. Like I don't need it. When I hate to say it, but often it's the smaller ones that need the most advice. They might be, even a greater risk because they maybe don't have an, internal counsel that they can rely on. That they're not actively engaging with lawyers. They're kind of just, I'm not saying that they're all flying by the seat of their pants, but there is there's a lot of pressure on them to get the product out to market, to start earning revenue, and they may not have taken the time to sit and think like, well, have we reviewed these contracts and are we doing? And our job is not to be the fun police. Like we're here to help them. I think that's often what people might think is like, oh, it's that insurance guy. I don't want to talk to him. He's going to be like trying to scare me into buying a policy, when that's not the aim at all. It's about, like I always say, being aware of these risks is like 90% of the battle. And that's going to go like, just being aware of them is going to give you like way more protection than the insurance policy. The insurance policy is not there to stop stuff going wrong. It's there if it goes wrong.
Right.
But if you go through the process and you're aware of the risks, you can maybe put a few things in place that are like, oh, well, hey, I should change my contacts. I need to be mindful of this. I need to be mindful of that. That is better protection from a risk.
Yeah.
Then insurance isn't there to protect you from a risk. It's there to like pay for something after it's gone wrong.
Yeah.
So I say that's probably like the biggest misunderstanding with it.
And one thing that you said in that I absolutely love, because like I can relate to it. I actually did this with a client in a different situation where you said, even just going through the process and learning about it, having a meeting with someone to learn about it. Now I get there's probably some fear because of what you let in with, like not understanding and, oh, they're just going to push this on me and whatever.
Mm.
But I mean, I share that same thing with the client when they were asking a lot about localization. I know enough about localization, but I don't necessarily know all the details. I know there's cultural aspects. I know there's, things that relate to art. It's not just about text and stuff. And when I said, hey, someone reached out to you, reach out to them, ask questions with like this way, and that way you're going to be better prepared to make a decision than anything I could possibly advise on you, because they're going to be the experts in that area. Same thing like you just said, having that understanding is then just going to allow you to have that much more information. And again, you could be that much more prepared with that information and everything else. So I love that you called that out, because I think this is something sometimes we don't really consider or think about. Like, just starting that process, understanding these things a little bit more is just going to get you that much more in tuned with your business and help you make smarter, better decisions, when the time is right or when you need to. So absolutely love that. I'm curious too, because, a lot of what you just shared, there's that big misconception of a misunderstanding, but I was wondering too, because I'm sure people's minds like, well, what are these risks that we may need to worry about
Yeah.
and everything else? I mean, can you just give us a high level overview of the types of risks that, let's say, game developers, face that, insurance can help mitigate or assist with if they or when they happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few that are fairly obvious, and things like intellectual property. So we're talking about like copyright, trademark infringement, the media that you're putting out there. Games are an audiovisual medium. Like, so if somebody looks at your products, looks at your game, and that character is too similar to something that I've got, or even the mechanics, or even the law, the coding, where you're getting that from, you could unintentionally be infringing somebody else's copyright or trademarks, and then they would possibly send you a cease and desist letter. They might lawyer up. So on the IP side, that's a fairly common one. But the things that people might not be considering is breaching contracts. So if you're working with a publisher, there could be failed deliverables, missed deadlines, missing milestones that could put you in a contract breach. If you're doing, let's say you're a work for hire studio and you're working on a bigger project, perhaps the work that you've put in, causes an issue to your client down the line. So let's say you were doing work for hire for a bigger game. Let's say they paid you like 20 grand for the job that you've done. You go off and you're working on something else. The game ships 6 months later, and then the work that you've done has caused like a game-breaking bug, and then they need to could be a massive issue. They need to fix it. That could cost them maybe over $1 million to put this problem right. And they're going to be like, well, you guys caused this, and we're going to want more than what did I say? We're going to want more than our 20 grand back. We're going to sue you for the cost of putting that problem right that you caused for us. And this could come out ages after you've gone and disappeared. So, there's insurance that can cover that thing. That's called errors and omissions insurance, or sometimes professional liability. You've also got issues around cybersecurity. So if you guys remember Cyberpunk, that was leaked out. That was off the back of a cyber attack. They got into, it was actually a third-party developer. It wasn't CDPR. It was a third-party developer. They got into their systems, and because they were doing work for Cyberpunk, they had access to the main source files, and that's how they got it. So this third-party dev would have been liable to CDPR for that, and that's a cyber issue. So you've got IP risk, you've got contract risk, you've got cyber risk, and all of these will have different things that you can put in place to try and tighten things up. So your contracts, you'd want to be ideally working with some decent lawyers, not ChatGPT, that have been there. It's not their first rodeo. They can look at your contracts and be like, yeah, this is okay, this is a good one, this is a bad one. Cybersecurity, it's like, well, if you've got remote workers, super common thing in the games industry, people work from home. Are they VPNing in? Have you got 2FA in place? What access are you giving them? How's that being restricted? Like, do you have somebody, sitting at home with a laptop that's got direct access to the source files for the next big thing, and then as soon as they finish their work, they're straight onto a dodgy website, and then boom, all your files are gone. So yeah, there's stuff you can put in place there. Your IP things. Like, are you working with a trademark attorney to do like trademark searches? Or if you're doing work for a client, are they signing off on things before you hand it over? AI is a whole other topic. We can talk more about AI and the issues around AI later if we have time. But that brings in a whole raft of other issues potentially. Yeah. And this is just like, we're just scratching the surface. I'm mindful of time, but yeah, there's loads of potential risks with making games, and but all very identifiable, all very fixable. There's lots of like stuff you can do to mitigate those problems. But like I said earlier, being aware of them is 90% of the battle.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because I realize in some of the questions that we have prepared here, some of them aren't necessarily going to be worth asking because of that main point. And again, I want to iterate to what you just said. It's like insurance doesn't necessarily help you avoid that risk, but what it does, if you're like everything you just explained, like the cybersecurity, some IP, like whether it's infringement on code or whatever the case is, right? These are all things like when you know that these are the potential problems, and yes, there is a measure that you can put in place to help you correct that and not have, huge financial burden and legal costs and stuff. Insurance isn't preventing those, but because what insurance will cover on that, it gives you that understanding of, oh, maybe I can, better structure my company. Maybe I can get the security protection that I need, or maybe, all these other things. It's like, okay, I could do these things. And then at some point where there's things that I don't necessarily have that level of control, then I can consider insurance where, hey, this could be a thing that happens regardless of how we approach things. Right. But if we have that protection in place, then at least we have a plan. Because here's the number one thing to consider too, folks. I've talked with a lot of studios too about, pain points and what's their biggest fears and things. And one of the biggest one, especially for, let's say, small but fairly large studios, is they can afford a game to flop. Because if they do, that could bring down the entire studio and that's it. Right? Think about it. Well, let's say the game isn't a flop, but there's an IP issue and you didn't have the protection. That could still be a flop, even though the game was a success, right? So there's any number of things that we never account for or consider. And I love how you're like,
well, I mean, there's I'm not going to name who it is. It'll be pretty obvious, but there's a very, very successful game out there at the moment that has a lot of animal catching mechanics that's very similar to another game. And, I don't know enough about what went on behind the scenes there, but that very successful game could have been completely shut down on that issue. And I'm not going to comment too much on it, but yeah, that's an example. I'm sure everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about there. But yeah, you could have a really great product and then run into an IP issue that completely shuts it down.
Yeah, exactly. On that note too, I'm a little curious as well. Like, you mentioned this before, and I'd like to kind of dive in a little bit more, but like, how does intellectual property insurance work? And why would you say it's so important for game developers?
Yeah, so there's different kinds of IP insurance. A lot of this gets bundled in with a professional liability policy, and that would cover, it would kind of like bundle up the risk for contract breaches, IP, and cyber risk. And within that, usually you're getting copyright and trademark insurance. And they're the most common issues. So a copyright infringement would be stuff like looking similar to something else. I'm sure a lawyer would come along and slap my wrist for that crappy definition of what copyright is. And then trademark would be more like, logos, characters, stuff like that. Beyond that, you're into more specialist stuff, which would be patent infringement. So if you've got a very unique mechanic or game system or hardware or something like that you have a patent on, so that's insurable. And that would be if someone is then accusing you of breaching their patent. Then you've also got trade secrets. So that's another type of IP. Again, that's fairly rare that comes up, but it's super relevant for some of the bigger studios. They might have some really complex algorithms for like matchmaking and so on. That could be a trade secret. So yeah, all sorts of specialist IP insurance out there.
Yeah. So again, it's like, hey, maybe this doesn't pertain to everybody, but still, I mean, there's varying levels of this stuff. And I mean, as you said earlier, Phil, I mean, there's a lot of this, we're probably just only scratching the surface, but it just goes to show that there's varying levels of degrees and layers and everything else that, just even knowing this stuff is important. A lot of us out there are looking to, work with, let's say, other partners, especially, publishers or investors. I mean, is there a kind of insurance that, let's say, indie devs should be thinking about when they're looking to work with these types of partners?
Yeah, this is usually like the first time we get approached by a lot of companies is it's when they're working with another publisher or they're working with licensed IP and they get a contract across their desk and there's a whole lot of stuff in the contract and there may well be a clause in there that says insurance. If we're going to work with you, we expect you to have insurance in place. And that's often where they'll either talk to their lawyers or they'll go on Google and be like, oh, hey, like game industry insurance. Hopefully they'll find us. But in those contracts, there's often all kinds of like weird and wonderful requirements. They're like, oh, you need errors and omissions insurance, you need, commercial general liability, you need this limit, that limit, all these extra stipulations and whatnot. And some of these contracts I've read, they're absolute nonsense. I've seen some that even ask for auto liability insurance, which, like Amazon, I'm going to call out Amazon here. They work with all kinds of companies, right? Not just game devs. And they'll have a contract that they'll give out to, most third parties, whether you're delivering goods to them or making a game. So you look at these and like, well, okay, if I'm developing a game, I don't need to get auto liability insurance, but they'll ask me and be like, oh, hey, Phil, like we want you to get us auto liability insurance because, we want to work with Amazon. And I'm like, well, you can't because that's not what you're doing. And they're like, oh, we just need to satisfy. Can we just get a piece of paper that says it and then we can move on? I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. So that can sometimes be a bit of a sticking point. But if you're on the other side of the fence, so if you're a publisher and you're looking to work with a developer and you want them to get insurance, generally you're going to be asking them for errors and omissions insurance to include things like breach of contract, IP insurance, possibly cyber liability, depending on the nature of the work you're doing with them. If there's any hardware requirements or physical elements to the game, if it's a VR game, if you're doing merch, you might then want to be looking at public liability insurance, which covers things for like injury liability. And so if you're a publisher or you're an IP licensor and you want to work with a third party, you want to be asking them to get cover. The reason that you're asking for them to get cover is if you're investing money in them or they're paying you for a license or you're trusting them with your IP and something goes wrong and you felt like you wanted to sue them, ideally you'd sort it out amicably. But if something really, really badly went wrong and you felt like, well, they've now caused this issue to me, as I mentioned earlier, for example, I work for hire and they caused some problem with the bigger game, and you felt like you wanted to sue them for like $1 million or more or whatever, if it's a small indie, then they're not going to have $1 million lying around. So you're going to want to make a call on their insurance policy. So that's often why it's in these requirements. So if you're looking to do work for hire, you might need to anticipate that they're going to be asking you to have insurance. Also, if you're pitching for a job and you've got two companies that are approaching a bigger publisher and say, hey, we want to do some work on this project for you, and by the way, this is what we'll charge you, and by the way, we're fully insured. That sort of helps your case a little bit. So it's sort of that's why the publishers ask for it in the contracts.
Yeah, and I love that too, and just even that final point when you're like, especially if you guys are doing B2B type stuff, contract work, studio house work, whatever, saying like, hey, we're fully insured. I mean, that in itself, it's not only protecting you, it's also protecting those partners you're planning to work with, and that in itself it can be a pretty significant, think of it as a feature or a differentiator for your business, because if there's other people who can't say that, and when you mention that and explain what that means, especially if it's with a potential partner or a prospect that doesn't or isn't familiar with that, that's be like, oh, cool. Well, then I even feel safer that I can trust these people more because they're doing their due diligence to make sure that we get what we need and everything else. So even on the minor scale of things outside of just risk, there's not necessarily too much. There is prevention, but it's more internal phase. But just the idea of it is just so helpful in lots of capacities.
I just want to add a quick tip there. So if anybody's in receipt of one of these like really complicated onerous insurance clauses in a contract, My top tip is just push back on it, and oftentimes they'll roll over and be like, yeah, that's fine. If you already have a policy, and let's say you're being asked to get like 5 mil or something and a lot of complicated stuff, and you just go back to and say, well, actually, we've got 1 mil of cover and here it is that okay? Like often they'll just say, oh yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So top tip there, like, don't be afraid to try and push back.
Yeah, and honestly, folks, and if you see those, I'm just guessing here because I'm not an expert in this, but if you're I would say that if you're seeing those clauses and stuff, like don't be afraid by it or be like, oh, we have to go out and do this or whatever. Yeah, like you said, ask those questions and stuff because, again, I'm sure they're just doing it on their end. Be like, hey, if we can get it, great, but it's not going to be a deal breaker for us. Or if there's certain things that are, I mean, these businesses aren't going to be. They want to prevent any risk as possible, and that's a big reason why they're putting those things in there in those terms. But a lot of times, they still want the business. They still want to work with you and such, and they understand the landscape. Not every indie dev is going to be able to have and address all these things. They get it, but if they can, why not? Right? It puts them in a better position.
Yeah. Never be afraid to negotiate on a contract. That's just general advice anyway, not just for insurance, but on all the other points too.
Yeah, I know you gave an example before, talking about like cyber attacks. And I know these are types of things that like happen more often than we would like to admit or think. And all of us are susceptible to them. I mean, and we might have covered, but is there anything else why, like in light of that and that potential that, that can really, what is it about insurance that can really help, studios in the event of cyber attacks? Because again, these are things that we can only do so much to prevent, but where does insurance really stand out and help studios under those situations?
Yeah, so I said earlier that insurance is mostly there for picking up the pieces, but there is with cyber insurance, there's one particular thing with ransomware attacks that's becoming more and more common, where you log onto your computer one morning and you're locked out. And it's like, oh, pay us $1 million, we'll unlock your systems for you. Now, the thing is, they usually will pay. Like if you pay them, they will unlock it. There's no benefit to them by actually scrambling all your data. Like no one wins then. They actually want to be paid. And insurers will pay out. They'll pay out. So I hope no hackers are listening to this. But yeah, if you've got an insurance policy that covers ransomware, yeah, the insurers will pay it, and then you can get your stuff back. Ideally, though, and this goes back to what I was saying about being prepared and going through the process of getting insurance quotes, is the insurers are going to ask you a whole bunch of questions on like, what security systems are you using? Like I said, do you have like 2FA? Where are you storing your data? Have you got cloud backups? Are you doing cold backups? Once you read through an application form for cyber insurance, if you can tick all of those boxes, you're 99% of the way there. Like if you got hacked into, it's like, oh, it's fine. We've got it backed up anyway. Because, this isn't really a secret, but everybody knows insurers don't like paying claims. It's in their interest to give you as much advice and support as possible so you don't have a claim. They don't want you to have a ransomware attack. So they're going to give you as much support and advice to make sure your systems are up to date. And they're going to be asking you lots of questions so that they can get comfortable that you are a low risk. It's the insurers that don't ask any questions and charge very little. They're the ones to sort of be a little bit wary about, because how are they affording to do that?
That last point I think is very important, because quick little story here. I know a neighbor of mine, totally different, relating to vehicles, but there was a type of insurance thing, and I think they went with just some maybe local unrecognized company, and they were telling me some stuff, and I was like, oh. And I started realizing, yeah, the insurance wasn't as much as maybe other things, but now they're running into just minor issues. But it seemed like there was some friction there and other things. And that just, I think, solidifies a very general point where it's like, and again, I think it's important. I'm not saying that this is a bad insurance company that they were using, but the point it goes to say, like, having that information, educating people as much as possible is only going to help protect the client, the customer, but also the insurance company too. So it's a win-win situation. And that's when, I mean, and that's, I think that's good business anyway. So when you're
Mm.
meeting people like that are looking to educate you the best that they're able to do to help you, it's only going to help themselves too. And those are the types of relationships you really want to look for.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I see it as like we're all in it together, like the client, the broker, and the insurer. Like we're all in this together. That's how it should be.
I want to kind of switch a little bit too in some other area because, this came up and I thought this is like kind of interesting because, again, there's so many areas that we don't think about how this, how insurance can help. But, crowdfunding is still a big thing for indie devs, studios, and such. But obviously, we don't always realize or anticipate that there are hidden risks with those things too. Is there anything that insurance could help on this front as well?
Yeah, so crowdfunding is becoming more and more common. It makes a lot of sense, especially with the industry the way it is at the moment. But yeah, there's a few hidden risks there. I would say stuff like, not non-delivering on promises. So if you have like stretch goals, you're gonna run into a heap of issues with a load of, if you don't like if you say you're gonna shift the game with multiplayer and then you don't, and a lot of people are gonna say, well, I invested based on that premise. But that's not too dissimilar anyway to like being careful with what you put in your trailers. So, when you watch a trailer now and it says like in-game footage or not in-game footage, that's because of that. That's because of that issue. So you've got to be like super transparent on what is a promise and what you're hoping to deliver versus like, if we get there, we'll try, but we can't guarantee. Definitely, if you're a dev and you're considering going on one of those platforms, whether it's Kickstarter or something else, read the terms and conditions. It sounds simple, but take the time, understand what you're signing up for. This is just general advice for anything. Like how many, if for all the devs that are listening to this, how many of you have actually read the T&Cs of like whatever engine you're using? If it's Unreal, if it's Unity, have you actually read the terms and conditions? If you're getting stuff out of the asset store, have you actually read the terms and conditions? And do you understand the risks there? So with crowdfunding, it's the same. Make sure you understand your liabilities to the end users. So each platform will have a different setup. You might just be like, oh, well, Kickstarter, we get this percentage, and or Indiegogo, we get this percentage. And you just go for the one with the biggest percentage to you, but they might have some like hidden clauses in there that you've not thought about. So to me, I'd say that's the biggest risk, is not understanding what you're signing up for. You're just thinking about like, we just want to Kickstarter, let's go for it.
Yeah. And again, what I'm seeing here today, folks, is this reoccurring theme is, just better understand what you don't know. Like, don't be afraid of these types of things. And yes, no one's expecting you to be the expert in it. Right. But as long as you have a pulse and an idea of it, it's just going to keep you, that much more prepared for what could be inevitable. And like, because I think this is probably a phrase maybe you could relate to or even back in a bit. It's not necessarily about if something happens, it's about when. And but
I'm not even that pessimistic.
Okay.
To be totally transparent, a lot of companies are fine and they never have insurance claims, and they buy insurance for many years, they never claim on it. Some of them may scratch their head and they're like, oh, what's the point of this? I've had insurance 10 years, I've never claimed on it. But look, if everybody had an insurance that has an insurance policy that makes a claim, it's going to be unaffordable. That's just the way the risk is pooled. So I'm not that pessimistic. It's not like, when you have an issue, a lot of them for many years will be fine, and that's great. So I don't want people's takeaway from this session to be like, oh no, like everything's terrible, I need insurance. You'll probably be fine. Most companies are. It's that like, if something went wrong, could you afford to deal with it? That's really what you're buying. It's like being able to sleep at night knowing like if something went wrong, we'll be okay.
Yeah. And I love that you said that too, because I try not to be that pessimist, and again, we can all only do with what we can within our means and everything too. But like, I guess maybe it's more on me. Sometimes I'm like, how do I be prepared for that? And what other actions can I take and stuff? But again, like now that I'm saying that, it's like, well, what is it about the things that like and understand? Like, what was it? Like, great example of me used personally, like for a while is I never had antivirus because I'm like, I'm savvy enough and all these other things. And I know a lot of
Right.
other people feel that way. And a friend of mine who works in IT and security and stuff, and he's telling me, he's like, dude, I know what you are. I know how smart you are with those things, but and he's like, what is it going to cost? And I looked and I'm like, oh, it's a no brainer. Just do it. And then boom,
Yeah.
it's those types of things. So no, but I love that you phrased it that way too, because it's like, it's just important to understand those things. And then it's like, hey, the reality of it and everything else, but then you still have that peace of mind. And that could speak volumes, especially depending on what it is you're doing, what areas of your business that do need to be really protected or against that
Yeah.
potential harm. So,
Yeah, I would say on just bouncing off from that is if you are going to speak to somebody about any risk, like be super transparent. And I know I'm kind of wedging this in, but I think it's such an important takeaway is tell your insurers, tell your brokers what you're doing as a business, overshare stuff as well. So we've had a few occasions where because the industry is quite secretive, right? And they're working on the next big thing, and it's all, oh, we're in stealth mode, like we can't tell you what we're doing. That's a huge problem, because if you don't tell your insurers what you're up to, and it turns out later down the road, it's like, oh, you're doing like a game with driving, and you've got loads of licenses with vehicle manufacturers and stuff like that, and you haven't told the insurers what it is, you might not be getting the right advice or the right coverage. So I know I'm kind of like wedging this point in there, but it's such an important one, is don't hold back, like overshare stuff. Because I think there's a lot of fear that, if I say the wrong thing, I won't get cover. And you're better off saying the wrong thing and the insurer saying, we don't want to insure you, than trying to hide it. And then you wouldn't be covered. So I'm just kind of wedging that in there. But I think I'm mindful of time, and I think that's just such a crucial thing, is like overshare stuff. Come on, if you think you do something new, talk to us about it.
I mean, in an indirect way, it goes back to your comment about don't bullshit, right?
Yeah, it goes both ways. Yeah.
It goes both ways. This one is more of withholding information, but it's kind of under the same premise. As we're approaching an end here, I'm also curious too, because, we talked a lot about things that, are apparent, but, is there any one emerging risk in gaming in general that, developers, let's say, aren't necessarily paying enough attention to? Was it something we talked about, or is it something else?
Yeah, I think the big one is AI at the moment. I don't think it's an emerging risk anymore. I think it's here. And I'm a huge advocate for AI. I think AI is great as a tool. It's just how you're using it. I get asked all the time, oh, can I get insurance for AI? And I think that's the wrong phrasing. It's like, what problem has AI caused me?
Yeah.
So a lot of people jump to copyright infringements. There's all this stuff recently with like people Ghiblifying or is it Ghibli or Ghibli? Studio Ghibli. They turn their avatars into like Studio Ghibli. I think that's like really fun, fairly harmless, but then what else are they using it for? And if you're putting stuff into your game or into your content, whether it's game dev or media or anything, you got to be super mindful of like, where's that come from? And you've got to demonstrate that you created that. But the thing that people aren't talking about with AI that they should be mindful of is ownership. So there's very few jurisdictions that actually recognize ownership of anything created with AI. So if you do put stuff into your project that had AI at any point in that workflow, whether it's a piece of code that you've helped designed or artwork or anything else, if you were to like sell your business or your IP or license out your IP later, and it comes up in the due diligence that you didn't actually own a core part of that workflow, that's a major problem. And I don't think enough people are talking about ownership from AI authored works. So yeah, keep an eye on that.
Yeah, that's such a good one, because again, folks, a lot of us don't think about those things in that way. And, like I know I've had some experiences too, where I had similar conversations around that. And what it comes down to is like you just said, that like that full ownership of that process. If you want to, patent something or whatever the correct term is for that. And part of that process is something that, you don't really have ownership on. It can't be unique. Anybody can pick it up. And if that's like a main strategy or focus for you and your company and growth and everything else, maybe you can't rely on that. And if you understand and know those things, that's going to be that much more beneficial just to have that understanding of it. So how you can like reposition. And that's one of probably many different scenarios that can come up and stuff. I know we have a little bit of time, and I think it relates back to IP, but I remember pre-recording, you shared a story with me that I thought was so cool about how one studio, they may not have made their game if they didn't have like the support of, insurance kind of backing them to giving them the confidence to push forward. If you can, I'd love for you to share that story, because I think it's a really cool one that really shines a different light on this concept and idea of insurance.
Yeah, cool. So I'm not going to mention the name of the studio, but I can talk broadly about it. So there is a game. People probably figure this out if they do a bit of research. But there's a game coming out soon that is very heavily inspired by some Disney-owned IP, and the publisher really liked the pitch. They're like, "This game looks really, really cool. We really want to publish it, but it's clearly inspired by some of this pre-existing Disney stuff." So we're a bit worried that if we invest in this game and it comes to market and then Disney just come and put like the ban hammer down and they're like, "No, that's not okay. We're not accepting this." So can we get insurance against copyright infringement? And if we can feel comfortable that there's protection there in the event that Disney come along, then yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll do the deal. So I looked at the game and I was like, yeah, that is pretty on the nose. But I felt like it was fine. It's inspired by, but not a copy of, which I think is okay. And I explained all this to the insurers, because that's the other side of what we do. It's not just like dealing with the clients. It's also like explaining what they do to the insurers. We kind of like have to translate this to them and be like, "Look, these are the risks and this is what it is. And what do you think? And this issue with Disney, are you comfortable with that?" And that goes back to my previous point about oversharing. Tell us what you're doing. What are you doing? Don't hide things, because it's always better that we're upfront with the insurers. So they got on board with it and they were like, "Yeah, we understand that that's a risk, but that is the point of the insurance. We're comfortable that we'll take that risk on and we'll charge X for it. So if something goes wrong, yeah, they're covered. We understand that, and this is the price." Go back to the publisher and the developer and say, "Right, okay, here's an insurance policy. Do you want it?" They bought it. Publisher's happy that there's protection in place. They published the game. It's coming out this year. Looks really awesome. And I know we're not fully responsible, but it's nice to feel like we've played a part in that game coming to market. So yeah, I just love that story. I think it's really cool, and it just it kind of shows like insurance is kind of there behind the scenes in a lot of these deals and games. And yeah, so that's really cool. I really like that story.
Yeah, and that's why I brought it up, because it really resonated with me too. And again, just painting this different picture of like, how possibly in some situations like this one, maybe that game might not have been made for some reason, because there was just that extra assurance there that made it happen and stuff. And I mean, again, like anything can go, anything can happen. And it's just great to hear those types of stories too, because we don't typically think of, insurance associating with a story like that. So that's why I liked it too. Well, we talked a lot today, Phil. And so based off of everything that we discussed, are there any like suggestions, tips, or whatever takeaways that you can share with our listeners today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give a couple of like super quick tips. First one, I think the big one is don't panic. Don't worry about insurance. You're probably going to be okay. It's rare that stuff goes wrong, but try and engage and understand your risks. So that's 90% of the battle. Also, go talk to a good lawyer. They are expensive. Good ones are expensive, but they'll give you a bit of time for free. Go call a few. Try and get half an hour of free time from 10 lawyers, and you'd be surprised what you learn. They're there to help you. It's money spent on lawyers could save you a lot of headaches later. And overshare stuff. Tell people what, not competitors, but if you're engaging with insurers, tell them about what you're doing. Overshare things, and make sure they understand what you're doing. They're my sort of quick tips.
Sweet. Well, thank you for those. And Phil, if people are considering this or just want to learn more or whatever the case is, what are some links or contacts that you could drop for, people to reach out and connect?
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, Phil Wildman. Hopefully I'm fairly easy to track down. If you want to visit our website, we've got a new website, goodgameinsurance.com. Hopefully pretty memorable name. Or email me, phil@gginsurance.net. But yeah, Phil Wildman on LinkedIn, track me down, send me a message, or goodgameinsurance.com.
Excellent. Well, Phil, I can't thank you enough. Folks, those links will be in the show notes. And it's really been a pleasure having you here. And I'm happy to say this is the first person on the show to talk about insurance. And wow, such a great and engaging conversation. And I learned a lot myself too. So Phil, can't thank you enough for being here. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you. It's been fun. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.